The little boy couldn't have been older than 6, standing too still by the fountain's edge in Milan's financial district, shoulders trembling, curls stuck to wet cheeks. His suit was navy and sharp, the kind that screamed money. But even dressed like the son of a prime minister, he was still just a child, alone, crying, and ignored by the crowd streaming past him. It was Milan at its most efficient, polished, busy, and emotionally blind. Nobody stopped. Nobody even slowed. I almost didn't either. But something made me pause, maybe the way his fists clenched like he was trying not to cry harder. I crouched slowly beside him, careful not to startle. "Ciao, tesoro," I said gently. "Stai bene? Sei perso." His head turned toward me fast, eyes dark, glassy, and full of a kind of panic I couldn't walk away from. He didn't answer right away, just stared. I tried English. Then Spanish. Nothing. Then I heard it, "Mama," whispered like a question to the sky. Italian. That one word flipped something in my brain. I'd spent a semester teaching in Florence, then kept up with lessons after moving back. Languages came easy to me. Italian stayed because it reminded me of warm light and a version of myself that felt a little more alive. "Vie tutto bene, piccolo," I said softly. "Sono qua per aiutarti. Come ti chiami?" Recognition sparked instantly. His tears didn't stop, but something in his shoulders relaxed. "Leo," he sniffled. "Mi chiamo Leo." He told me in rushed, 6-year-old Italian that he'd seen a dog, wandered away from his nanny, and now couldn't find anyone. I took his small, cold hand. "Lo troveremo, Leo," I promised. "Ti aiuto io." I hadn't even had time to figure out what to do next when I saw them. 3 men in dark suits, moving with unmistakable intent. Not police. Not parents. Security. They surrounded us within seconds. And then he appeared. Tall, broad, cutting through the noise like a blade, white shirt, dark gaze, tension rippling under calm. He didn't look like a father. He looked like someone used to giving orders and having them followed. Leo let go of my hand and ran to him. "Papa. Lei mi hai aiutato," he said, pointing back at me. "She helped me." The man's eyes, already assessing me like I was something to be contained, narrowed. He didn't thank me. Didn't smile. Didn't speak to me at all. Just turned to one of the men beside him and said, quietly, clearly, "Trove tutto su di lei. Nome. Lavoro. Famiglia. Tutto. Find everything about her. Name. Job. Family. Everything." Before continuing the story, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories to you. The walk home felt longer than usual, my feet heavy and my pulse still uneven from the encounter at the fountain. I kept replaying his voice in my head, find everything about her, each word colder than the marble floors of Piazza del Liberty. Even when I reached my building, I hesitated, half expecting one of those suited men to step out of the shadows. The street looked normal, traffic humming, people talking, Milan being Milan. But something inside me whispered that nothing about my life was normal anymore. When I reached my apartment door, my hands were trembling so badly I dropped my keys twice before managing to unlock it. I shut the door behind me quickly, leaning against it like I could keep the world out by sheer force of will. For a few minutes, I just stood there, listening for footsteps in the hallway, for a knock, for anything that might mean they had followed me inside. But the silence remained, frustrating and comforting all at once. Eventually, exhaustion pushed me toward the couch, where I sat staring at nothing for what felt like hours. Night fell without my noticing, the room dimming until only the glow from the street lamps seeped through the blinds. I finally stood to close them fully, wanting to shut out the city, the fountain, the man in white whose gaze felt like it had burned straight into my bones. But when I shifted one of the blinds with my fingers, my breath caught in my throat. Parked directly across the street was a sleek black car, long, tinted windows, engine idling quietly. It didn't move, didn't flash its lights, didn't even pretend to disguise its presence. I stepped back from the window so fast my heel hit the radiator behind me. My first instinct was to call the police, but how exactly would that conversation go? "Hi, a mafia boss might be parked outside my building, can you come check?" Even thinking the word Mafia made my stomach twist, though no one had said it aloud. I pulled out my phone anyway, hovering over the keypad, but then lowered it slowly because something deep inside me insisted this was less a threat and more a warning. We see you. For the rest of the night, I walked through my apartment in jittery circles, afraid to turn off the lights, but too drained to leave them on. I kept checking the window every few minutes, hoping the car would be gone, irritated when it wasn't. Around midnight, a man briefly stepped out of the rear passenger side, tall, broad shoulders, wearing a dark coat, and looked directly at my building. Even at that distance, I could tell he wasn't looking for someone. He was looking at someone he already knew was there. Then he returned inside, and the door clicked shut. Eventually, sometime after 2 in the morning, my exhaustion finally won. I dragged myself to bed, leaving the blinds closed, but knowing the car remained below like some silent sentinel. My sleep was restless, full of half-dreams of running down endless alleys with the sound of Italian orders echoing behind me. Each time I startled awake, my heart hammered so violently it felt like it bruised my ribs. When the alarm went off at 6, my body felt as if it hadn't rested at all. Getting dressed for school felt surreal, like going through the motions of a life I wasn't sure belonged to me anymore. As I walked out into the hallway, I half expected someone to be waiting, but the corridor was quiet. The morning air outside was crisp and smelled faintly of roasted coffee from the cafe on the corner, grounding me just enough to take a steadying breath. But when I looked toward the street, the black car was still there. Same position, same windows, same silent threat or promise. My pulse spiked again, but I forced myself to keep walking. On the subway platform, I kept turning my head, checking my periphery, scanning for the tall man from the night before. People came and went, none paying attention to me, all moving with the hurried efficiency of a weekday morning in Milan. I tried to convince myself I was paranoid, that the car and the man were coincidences, that no criminal organization truly cared about a random schoolteacher who happened to speak Italian. But the back of my neck prickled, a subtle alarm I'd learned long ago not to ignore. When the train arrived, I boarded quickly, gripping the pole tighter than necessary. I made it 2 stations before I felt it, the unmistakable sense of being watched. Not the casual glance of a commuter. Something sharper, intentional, tracking. At the next stop, I stepped off, pretending it was my destination, then walked briskly toward the escalators. When I reached the top, I glanced back and saw him, a suited man, clean-shaven, sharp coat, eyes fixed on me like I was an item on a checklist. My breath caught, but I forced my legs into motion, heading toward the street where more people clustered, figuring a crowd was safer. I kept walking fast, pretending not to notice him closing the distance. When I turned the corner toward the school, I glanced back again. He was gone. Not walking away. Not ducking behind a building. Just vanished. The abruptness of it made my skin crawl. By the time I reached the school gates, my nerves were so frayed I almost didn't see the delivery man standing there with a bouquet in his hands. He perked up when he saw me, checking his clipboard. "Eva Larsen?" he asked in accented English. I nodded, hesitant, and he handed me the flowers as though this was the most normal thing in the world. The bouquet was stunning, white lilies, pale blue hydrangeas, and sprigs of rosemary tucked among them. Expensive. Carefully arranged. Not the kind of thing a student's parent would casually send. Attached to the stems was a small cream-colored card, folded once. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single word. Grazie. I stared at it for several seconds before tucking the card back into the arrangement. My mind echoed with the same warning, the same truth I was slowly beginning to absorb. I had stepped into something I didn't understand, something that was already pulling me deeper. But as I inhaled the soft scent of the lilies, a different truth hummed beneath the fear, an odd, inexplicable curiosity. Whatever this was, whatever Alessio Costa's world meant, I wasn't sure I wanted to run from it anymore. When I entered the teacher's lounge with the bouquet, a few coworkers raised their eyebrows, offering teasing smiles and playful comments. I forced a laugh, pretending it was a gift from a boyfriend they'd never heard about, anything easier than confessing the reality. One colleague joked that someone out there clearly had refined taste, and another teased that I must be hiding a secret romance. Their voices felt distant, muffled, like I was listening from behind a wall. If only they knew the truth, that the man behind these flowers didn't know how to flirt, only how to command. In class, I tried to focus on my students, but my mind drifted again and again to the black car, the shadowing figure, the single word on the card. Each time a door opened in the hallway, my body tensed before I realized it was just another teacher. Each time a phone buzzed, I half expected it to be another call from a blocked number. The minutes ticked by slowly, heavy with the sense that something was shifting in my life. Something I hadn't chosen, yet couldn't seem to escape. During my lunch break, I returned to my classroom to find the bouquet on my desk again. Someone must have moved it from the lounge. Sunlight spilled through the windows, hitting the petals and making them glow faintly. I traced one fingertip along a hydrangea bloom, soft and cool under my skin. The flowers didn't feel like a threat, they felt like a message. And maybe that was more unsettling. As the afternoon classes passed, the weight on my chest fluctuated between anxiety and a strange, reluctant anticipation. I couldn't deny it anymore, not really. The same fear that made my hands shake also tugged at me with a curiosity I couldn't explain. I wanted to know why Alessio Costa cared enough to send protection, to track my movements, to send flowers from the shadows. I wanted to know who he was beyond the cold command and the protective reach. By the time the final bell rang, my nerves had settled into something tighter, quieter, almost like acceptance. I gathered my things, sliding the cream-colored note into my bag as though it needed to be hidden from the world. Stepping into the hallway, I scanned the faces of students and teachers, half expecting someone unfamiliar to be waiting. But the halls were ordinary again, full of everyday noise and chatter. Ordinary everywhere, except inside me. When I finally stepped outside, the sky was clouded, the kind of gray that made the city feel softer around the edges. I took a steadying breath and adjusted the strap of my bag, but before I could take a step, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. The caller ID was blank. My pulse raced as I pressed the phone to my ear. A calm male voice spoke, smooth and emotionless. "You have nothing to fear, Miss Larsen. Mr. Costa ensures the safety of those who help his family." The call disconnected before I could respond. And for the first time since yesterday, I knew one thing with unsettling clarity. I wasn't invisible to him. Not anymore. The note and flowers might have been the polite part of whatever this was, but what came next felt closer to a summons. It was Thursday afternoon, and I was locking up my classroom when a man I didn't recognize stepped into the hallway. He wore a dark, tailored coat and stood out like he didn't belong in a school, more steel than softness. "Miss Larsen," he asked, voice low but sure. I nodded before I could decide not to. "I work with Mr. Costa," he continued, offering no business card, no title, only presence. "My name is Giorgio. He'd like to invite you to dinner. As a personal thank you." He said it like an instruction dressed as an invitation, and I wasn't sure if refusing was an actual option. I started, unsure what I was even trying to say. Giorgio held up a hand, not rudely, just firmly. "He understands if you decline. But the invitation stands for tonight. 7 o'clock. There will be a car waiting." He gave me a slip of paper, just an address, no name, then turned and walked away without waiting for a reply. By the time I got home, the piece of paper felt heavier in my bag than it should have. I stared at it on my kitchen table, pacing back and forth like that would help me decide. Dinner with a man like Alessio Costa didn't come without cost, even if it was just food and conversation. But the curiosity that had been whispering since the fountain was now a dull roar in the back of my skull. I told myself I was just being polite, but that wasn't the truth. At exactly 6:30, the black car pulled up in front of my apartment. Same tinted windows. Same silent presence. The driver stepped out, dressed in a suit, holding the door open like I was someone important. I almost turned around and walked back inside. But I didn't. The car took me through central Milan, weaving past familiar places that suddenly felt unfamiliar through the lens of this new world. The destination was a rooftop restaurant I'd only ever passed by, the kind of place with velvet ropes, reservations booked months in advance, and views so high they made your ears pop. The elevator was glass, and by the time we reached the top, my heart was doing a steady thrum against my ribs. A hostess greeted me with a soft smile, no need to ask my name. She simply said, "Right this way." He was already seated at the far end of the terrace, back straight, eyes on the skyline. No phone, no drink, just waiting. When I approached, he stood, buttoning his jacket as though this was a business dinner, not something more complicated. "Miss Larsen," he said smoothly, his voice calmer than I remembered, "thank you for coming." I sat, nodding politely. "You sent a car." "I did," he replied. "Would you have come if I hadn't?" I hesitated, then gave him the truth. "I'm not sure." His lips tilted slightly, not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement. A waiter arrived and poured water. No menus were offered. Apparently, decisions had already been made. "I hope you like seafood," he said, folding his hands together. "The chef makes an incredible sea bass." I didn't know how to respond to that or to any of this, so I just nodded again. For several moments, we sat in silence, the city glowing beneath us. Finally, Alessio leaned forward, voice even. "My son doesn't speak to anyone outside my household. Not since his mother died." His words hung there, heavy but unadorned. "He's had tutors, therapists, nannies. No one breaks through." I didn't know what to say, so I waited. He continued after a beat, voice quieter now. "And yet, when I arrived at the fountain, he was holding your hand. He was speaking." He looked at me then, really looked, and the force of it made me blink. "I don't know what I did," I admitted. "I just spoke to him. In his language." "And he responded," Alessio said simply. He smiled. The waiter returned with a first course I didn't recognize, and I took a moment to gather myself. "What exactly is this dinner for?" I asked carefully. "Besides seafood." Alessio met my gaze without blinking. "I want to hire you." My fork paused midair. "Excuse me?" As Leo's tutor, he clarified. "Italian language, cultural education, simple structure. For afternoons per week, private residence, all security arranged." I set my fork down. "I already have a job." "This would pay 10 times what you make now," he said bluntly. "Legally, of course. Through one of my family's education foundations. There would be no risk to your professional reputation." It was a generous offer, too generous. "Why me?" I asked. "Surely you could find someone with more qualifications, more experience." "Because Leo responded to you," he said simply. "Not to a resume. Not to a degree. To you." I sat back in my chair, the city spinning a little faster beneath my feet. "And what happens if I say no?" He didn't flinch. "Then you go back to your life. No pressure. No punishment." "But the cars outside my apartment?" "The man who followed me." "That was protection," he said. "Not surveillance." Forgive me if the line between those two feels thin. "Understood." He took a sip of wine and watched me silently for a beat. "I don't want you to feel trapped, Miss Larsen. I want you to feel valued." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because somewhere between the flower delivery and this dinner, part of me had already crossed a line. And it terrified me how easily I'd done it, not out of greed, but out of something quieter. Something like wanting to matter. The main course arrived, and we ate in near silence. Every time I looked up, Alessio was watching me, not in a predatory way, but with the unsettling calm of someone who had already decided something. When the plates were cleared, he reached into his jacket and slid a sealed envelope across the table. "This contains the details," he said. "Schedule, pay, background checks we'd need you to complete. You don't have to decide tonight." I touched the envelope but didn't open it. "Why me?" I whispered again, not expecting a different answer. But this time, his voice dropped low, almost too soft to hear. "Because when I saw my son smile at you, I remembered what it felt like to hope." I couldn't breathe for a moment. Not because of the weight of his words, but because I believed them. Completely. And that, more than anything, made this dangerous. This wasn't just a job offer. It was an invitation into a world I didn't understand. When the dinner ended, he didn't press. He simply stood, helped me into my coat, and walked me back to the elevator. "Thank you for your time," he said quietly. "Regardless of your decision, you have my respect." It was too polished, too careful, and yet I believed that too. The driver waited downstairs, silent as ever, and when I reached my apartment again, the envelope still rested in my hands like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I didn't open it right away. I just sat on my couch, staring at it, replaying every word from that rooftop. I should have felt fear. Instead, I felt something far more dangerous: curiosity. If you were in Eva's shoes, offered life-changing money and purpose by a dangerous but sincere man, would you take the job? Tell us in the comments what you would do, and don't forget to subscribe for the rest of Eva's story. Things are only getting more intense from here. The envelope sat untouched on my kitchen table for a full 24 hours. I didn't open it, didn't peek inside, didn't even move it when I cleared my breakfast dishes. It sat like a lit fuse, daring me to strike the match. But when my phone buzzed the next afternoon with a simple text, "Leo would like to see you." No pressure. I didn't hesitate. I knew then. I wasn't deciding if I would say yes. I was already halfway through saying it. The car came again, sleek and quiet, its windows darkened against the city's noise. This time, I didn't feel like a hostage. I wasn't afraid, just braced. My reflection in the tinted glass looked like someone about to walk into something irreversible. I didn't recognize the version of me who was curious enough to follow a stranger into a life she didn't understand, but I didn't stop her either. Alessio's estate was nothing like I expected. It wasn't a gaudy mansion behind electric gates or a glass fortress in the hills. Instead, it was a sprawling villa tucked discreetly behind ivy-covered walls in a quiet corner of Milan's oldest district, elegant, subdued, and terrifying in how normal it appeared. The kind of wealth that didn't shout. The kind that whispered, and still got everything it wanted. The front gate opened automatically as the car pulled in, and I caught sight of a curved gravel path leading to a stone courtyard, a fountain at its center. The house loomed ahead, pale stucco with arched windows, potted lemon trees flanking the doors. As we slowed to a stop, I saw a figure dart out of the entryway and down the steps. My heart caught in my throat before I realized Leo. He was running toward the car. By the time I stepped out, he was already tugging at my hand, smiling so wide I forgot to be nervous. "Sei venuta," he said brightly. "You came." "Of course I came," I answered in Italian, crouching beside him. "You invited me, didn't you?" He nodded solemnly. "I made a picture. For you." Before I could respond, the front doors opened again and Alessio appeared, no jacket this time, sleeves rolled, presence still commanding but softer somehow. He didn't say anything right away, just watched us, hands in his pockets, eyes unreadable. Leo pulled me toward the house, babbling in fast Italian about his drawing and how he wanted to show me his toy castle. I followed, and Alessio fell into step behind us like a shadow I couldn't shake. Inside, the villa was all warm wood and old-world charm, high ceilings, arched doorways, stone floors softened by Persian rugs. I noticed family photos along one hallway wall, carefully framed and spaced, Leo at different ages, a beautiful dark-haired woman beside him in several. His mother, I assumed. The sight made my chest tighten for reasons I didn't examine too closely. A woman who used to walk these halls, now just a memory between glass and frame. Leo led me to a sunlit sitting room where a low table was already set up with paper, colored pencils, and flashcards. "Let's learn words," he announced proudly, climbing into a chair and patting the one beside him. I looked at Alessio, who nodded once, silently granting permission I hadn't asked for. Then he left the room without a word, disappearing like smoke. It was just me and the boy now. We started with colors and shapes, his Italian flawless, but his understanding of structure and rules shaky. I introduced gentle games, mixing vocabulary into play, and slowly, his confidence bloomed. He laughed when I made mistakes on purpose, corrected me with delight, and then turned serious as we sounded out syllables together. His concentration was sharp, his mind quick, but more than that, he was hungry for attention. For connection. By the end of the hour, he was curled against me on the rug, tracing letters on flashcards with a tiny index finger. You're good at this, I said softly. You're better, he murmured, not looking up. Better than the others. I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. When Alessio returned, he stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. He likes you, he said simply. I like him, too, I replied, smoothing Leo's curls. He's bright. Gentle. Most people don't see that. They just see me. And they get afraid. There was no pride in his voice, only a quiet sadness. We moved to a different room than a library lined with dark wood shelves, the smell of old books and lemon polish filling the space. Alessio gestured for me to sit, and I did, feeling the weight of something formal but unspoken. If you accept the job, he began, you'll have complete autonomy in how you teach him. I won't interfere. But I'll expect updates. And you'll never be alone with him without my security present. I nodded. That's fair. You'd come 4 afternoons a week. I'll arrange transportation to and from your apartment. Payment will be processed through a legitimate trust. And you'll be under our protection for the duration of your employment. The word protection made my spine stiffen, but I didn't interrupt. He continued, you'll have access to any materials you need, books, art supplies, whatever helps him learn. Whatever helps him smile again. I sat quietly for a moment, fingers folded in my lap. Why do I feel like this is more than a job? Alessio didn't blink. Because it is. He stood then, moving toward the window, his back to me. Leo lost something when his mother died. And you made him feel safe again. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unspoken. I could have walked away right then. I could have thanked him for the opportunity and left with my principles intact. But Leo's small voice echoed in my head, soft and earnest, you came. And somewhere between that sun-drenched sitting room and this solemn library, something inside me clicked. I'll do it, I said. He turned slowly, watching me like he wasn't sure I meant it. You're certain? I'm sure enough to try. His expression shifted just slightly, something like relief flickering behind his eyes. Then we begin Monday. He walked me back to the front doors himself, Leo trailing behind, still holding the picture he'd made for me, a child's crayon rendering of a castle and a smiling stick figure holding his hand. That's you, he explained shyly. And that's me. I swallowed past the knot in my throat. It's perfect. Can you keep it? I nodded. Always. Alessio opened the door and gestured to the waiting car. The driver will take you home. Let me know if anything about the arrangement feels unclear. I turned toward him, hesitating. And if something feels unsafe? His voice dropped to something colder, sharper. It won't. As I stepped into the car, Leo called after me one more time. Don't forget Monday. I won't, I promised. And as the car pulled away from the villa, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Alessio. Not of his world. Not even of the pull it already had on me. By the 3rd week, the estate began to feel less like foreign territory and more like a place my body knew before my mind could admit it. The guards at the gate started greeting me by name. Teresa, the housekeeper, offered espresso when I arrived and packed me little snacks for the ride home. Even Leo had a rhythm now, waiting at the door when the car pulled in, shouting, Eka, before racing down the hall. I told myself I was still just a tutor, but deep down I knew I was becoming something else. Leo's progress astonished everyone except me. He was smart, hungry to connect, and once he trusted me, it was like a door swung open that no one else had known how to knock on. He asked questions constantly, in Italian and English, switching back and forth like it was a game. When we read together, he leaned into my side without thinking. When we painted, his hand found mine like it belonged there. But it wasn't just Leo changing, it was Alessio too. At first, he only lingered near the end of my sessions, appearing in doorways or standing quietly in the back of the room. Then one afternoon, he joined us at the table, helping Leo pronounce a difficult word, his voice low and patient. The next time, he stayed longer. By the end of that week, we were all sitting in the garden together, sharing espresso and almond cookies like a strange little trio. I told myself it was fine. Professional. Harmless. He never touched me, never said anything inappropriate. But the way he listened when I spoke, really listened, made it hard to breathe sometimes. And when our eyes met over Leo's head, something unspoken hovered between us like a fragile glass. In those moments, I saw someone different from the man who commanded rooms with silence and wore power like a second skin. I saw a father, a widower, a man who sat too still when Leo ran ahead, as if watching him was both a blessing and a penance. And maybe, just maybe, I saw someone who didn't know how to be alone anymore. We started talking more after lessons about Italy, about teaching, about art. One evening, he asked what made me fall in love with the Italian language. The way it moves, I said without thinking. Like it's made of color instead of sound. He'd smiled at that, a real smile, not the calculated curve of a man used to manipulating rooms. Another afternoon, he asked if I still painted. I laughed a little, brushing chalk off my jeans. Not anymore. Can't afford the supplies, and honestly, I wouldn't even know where to start again. He looked at me, then said nothing, which somehow made the moment feel more important than if he'd replied. The next day, I came home from work and found a box sitting just inside my apartment door. It was beautifully wrapped, cream paper with a navy ribbon, no note. My stomach flipped even before I opened it. Inside were oil paints, professional grade, and brushes so fine they looked hand-carved. At the bottom, a set of stretched canvases wrapped in tissue paper. I stared at them for a long time, torn between awe and something that felt uncomfortably close to dread. There was no question where they came from. No one else knew about the paints. No one else had listened that closely. And suddenly, I didn't know whether to smile or scream. The next time I saw him, I didn't say anything right away. We sat in the garden while Leo ran circles in the grass with a soccer ball. Alessio poured espresso into 2 tiny cups, handed me one, and finally asked, "Did they arrive?" I nodded slowly. Yes, they did. He didn't look smug or expectant, just calm. "I'm not trying to buy your affection," he said, voice steady. "I just think people should be able to do what they love." I looked at him over the rim of my cup, unsure how to respond. "It's not a small gift," I said finally. "It's a lot." "It's nothing to me," he replied simply. "But it could be something for you." His eyes held mine like he was trying to tell me something more without saying it out loud. I remember what Gianna used to say, "We don't measure love in cost. We measure it in listening." And then he looked away, as if he hadn't just handed me something much more dangerous than paint. From that moment on, everything shifted. He still never touched me. Never crossed a line. But there was something in the way he lingered now, in the silences between us, in the way he looked at me like I was a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve or ruin. I tried to stay neutral. Focused. Focused on Leo's progress, on my boundaries, on the fact that I was an employee in a house where boundaries were probably written in ash. But every time Alessio brought me coffee, asked about my favorite books, or remembered something I'd said days ago, the line blurred a little more. One evening, after a session where Leo nailed every vocabulary card and then proudly wrote his name in both languages, I stayed longer than I meant to. Teresa brought dinner to the terrace, and Alessio asked if I wanted to join them. "Just pasta," he said, almost shy. "No obligations." And I said yes. The meal was simple, comforting, filled with stories about Leo's obsession with dinosaurs and how he once tried to bury a book in the backyard because the ending was too sad. I laughed until my ribs hurt. Alessio didn't say much, but he watched. Not in a possessive way. In a present way. Afterward, I helped clear the table without being asked. Teresa insisted I didn't have to, but I needed something to do with my hands. When I turned to find Alessio again, he was standing at the edge of the garden, half in shadow, watching the last of the sunlight fade behind the house. I joined him without thinking. We stood in silence for a long moment. "Why me?" I asked, before I could stop myself. "You could have chosen anyone to teach Leo." He didn't look at me. "Because he chose you." "And you," I whispered. "Did you?" His answer was quiet. "I'm still choosing." I left a few minutes later, heart pounding harder than it should have been. That night, I unwrapped the brushes and arranged the paints on my desk, fingers tingling like they did before I ever picked up a brush in college. I still hadn't used them, but I would. I could feel it building. Like something inside me was waking up. I started staying a little later after lessons, lingering by the library door if I thought Alessio might be inside. He started offering me books on art, on philosophy, even one on childhood language development he said reminded him of Leo. We didn't talk about the house's security anymore. We didn't talk about what he did when he wasn't watching his son or brewing espresso in the garden. But we talked about everything else. And that's what made it dangerous. When does a boundary become a bond, and how do you know when you're crossing it? If you've ever found yourself in a moment that felt more meaningful than it should have, tell us in the comments. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens when those blurred lines finally break. The gift arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, left neatly on my doorstep like something precious instead of something grotesque. A velvet box, deep red, expensive looking, the kind that should have held jewelry or delicate keepsakes. My breath caught before I even opened it because something in the weight felt wrong. When I finally lifted the lid, the world tilted. Inside lay a dead bird, small and limp, its feathers still glossy, its eyes mercifully closed. There was no note tucked beneath it, no signature, no threat spelled out in ink. Just the sickening clarity of what it meant. A warning. A message. A line drawn in blood and laid gently at my feet. My first instinct was to back away, hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the box. The hallway spun with a hollow ringing in my ears, and the air felt too thin to breathe properly. Whoever had left it hadn't knocked, hadn't made noise, they'd simply come and gone like a ghost. I set the box down on the floor, trembling. And then my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the driver, Marco. "Miss Larsen, are you home?" he asked, too calm to be casual. I swallowed hard. Someone left something for me. "I'm already outside," he interrupted, voice tightening. "Don't touch anything." "I'm coming up now." Less than a minute later, he was at my door. His eyes landed on the velvet box, and the muscle in his jaw ticked once. "It's a message," he said quietly, slipping on gloves. "We'll take care of it." "From who?" I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. Marco didn't answer. He closed the lid, wrapped the box in a cloth, and tucked it under his arm. "Mr. Costa will want to see you." The car ride to the estate felt different this time, tighter, heavier, the city blurring past like it was trying not to witness what was happening. When we arrived, the gates swung open before the car even slowed. I stepped out into the courtyard, but before I could reach the entrance, raised voices drifted from inside. Not just raised shouting. Sharp, lethal Italian. The kind of tone that made my blood run cold. I followed the sound down the hallway until I reached the study, and there he was, Alessio, sleeves rolled, fists clenched, face carved into fury. "They left it at her home," he snarled at one of his men. "At her home?" "Yes, sir," the man stammered. "We believe it was. I don't care who you believe. I want names. Locations. Now." His fist slammed into the desk hard enough that papers scattered like frightened birds. I should have walked away, given him privacy, done anything except stand there frozen. But I couldn't move. Alessio turned sharply at the sound of my breath, his gaze landing on me like a physical force. For a second, the fury didn't leave his eyes, it just shifted, sharpened, focused entirely on me. "Eva," he said, voice roughened with something deeper than anger. "What was it?" he asked, softer now but no less intense. I swallowed hard. "A bird." He closed the distance between us in 3 strides. "They will never touch you." I don't understand who they are." His jaw tightened. "People who want to hurt me. People who use the innocent to send their messages." He didn't touch me, but he stood close enough that I felt the heat radiating from his skin, the barely contained violence simmering beneath it. "This is my fault," he muttered. "I should have put more security on you." "You already had people watching me everywhere," I whispered, unable to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Clearly not enough." His anger wasn't directed at me, but it terrified me all the same. He dismissed his men with a flick of his hand, then ushered me into a quieter lounge across the hall. The moment the door shut behind us, the air shifted again. Alessio pressed his knuckles against his forehead, breathing slowly like he was trying to hold himself together. "I'm sorry you were dragged into this." "I knew there was danger," I murmured. Not that it would be left on my doorstep." His gaze lifted to mine, and something raw flickered in it. "If you want to walk away, I'll understand," he said. I won't stop you. And for a heartbeat, I considered it running, choosing safety, choosing normalcy. But the image of Leo laughing yesterday in the garden cut through that thought like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Leaving wasn't as simple as packing a bag. I was already tied to them, whether I admitted it or not. He walked me to the stairs where Leo was waiting, small hands tucked behind his back, eyes wide with worry. "Eva," he asked softly when he saw me. "Are you sad?" I knelt beside him, forcing a smile. "I'm okay, Leo." "You promise?" That question, those two quiet words, shattered whatever resolve I had left. I reached out and pulled him into my arms, feeling his little fingers bunch into my sweater. "I promise," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to reassure more, him or myself. His small body trembled against mine, and instinctively, I held him tighter. Leaving wasn't an option. Not anymore. Later, after dinner, I stayed to tuck him into bed, something that wasn't part of my job, but had become part of my evenings anyway. He held my hand the entire walk to his room, refusing to let go, as if someone else might try to take me away. When he climbed into bed, he didn't release me. "Don't leave me," he murmured against my sleeve. "Please don't." The plea went straight through me, bypassing logic and every instinct of self-preservation. "I won't," I whispered, stroking his hair gently. "I'm right here." He relaxed only then, eyes drifting shut, breath evening out as he slipped into sleep. I stayed until his grip loosened from exhaustion, not from trust. And by the time I stood to leave the room, I realized something awful and beautiful at once. I couldn't walk away now, even if I wanted to. When I returned downstairs, Alessio was waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall as if he'd been holding his breath the whole time. His expression softened slightly when he saw me. "He wouldn't sleep without you," he said quietly. "I know," I murmured. The space between us hummed with tension, not romantic, not yet, but protective, fierce, and frighteningly intimate. For a moment, we just stood there, two people caught in the crossfire of a world neither of us could fully escape. The dead bird still echoed in my mind, a warning painted in feathers and crimson. But Leo's tiny voice drowned it out, echoing louder than any threat. "Please don't leave me." And I knew, with a clarity that made my stomach twist, that I wouldn't. The air was thick that afternoon, not with heat, but with something heavier, tension, maybe, or the kind of unspoken truth that pressed against the walls of a room until someone finally acknowledged it. Leo was off that day, distracted, quiet, not his usual joyful self. When I asked if something was wrong, he shrugged and said nothing, clinging closer to me than usual during reading time. Alessio didn't appear during the session, which only made the silence louder. The estate felt still in a way that unsettled me. After the lesson, Teresa said Alessio was upstairs, in the studio I hadn't yet seen. She hesitated before giving me the directions, as if unsure whether to say anything at all. "He goes there when he's thinking," she said carefully. I didn't ask what that meant. I just followed the curved staircase to the top floor, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the marble. The studio door was slightly ajar, the light inside soft and golden, as if the room itself knew not to intrude too harshly. I knocked once, then pushed it open gently. Alessio stood near the tall windows, his back to me, sleeves rolled, arms crossed. The room was beautiful, dust motes caught in the sunbeams, canvases stacked neatly in the corners, the faint scent of turpentine and memory lingering in the air. And though he hadn't turned, I knew he'd heard me. "This was Gianna's," he said finally, voice low and even. "She painted here every morning, rain or shine." I stepped in carefully, closing the door behind me. "It feels like it remembers her." He nodded once, not turning. "Sometimes I come up here when I forget what it was like to feel human." The confession hit harder than I expected. We stood in silence for several seconds, the kind that feels longer than it is. Then he turned to face me, and I saw it, his walls down, his edges dulled by something too vulnerable to be armor. "My son smiled again because of you," he said. "Do you know how long it's been since he laughed like that?" My breath caught, and I shook my head. "He's easy to love." Alessio took a slow step closer, not predatory, not possessive, just present. "I don't know what this is between us," he said. "But I can't keep pretending it doesn't exist." I've been pretending, too, I admitted. Telling myself it's just the job. Just Leo. But it's not. Another step brought him close enough that I could see the faint line between his brows, the sleeplessness in his eyes, the hesitation in his body. "You've brought light back into my house," he murmured. "Into my life." "You brought me back to myself," I whispered. And then neither of us moved, but something shifted. The silence became a question. And I answered it. I kissed him first, barely, softly, my hand resting on his chest like I needed to feel his heartbeat to believe this was real. He didn't pull me closer, didn't rush the moment. Instead, he breathed into it, his lips brushing mine again like he was relearning how to want gently. Then his hands found my waist, warm and certain, and the kiss deepened, still careful, but no longer tentative, like two people who had been circling each other too long. When we finally pulled apart, I didn't open my eyes right away. I was afraid the world would look different if I did. Alessio rested his forehead lightly against mine, his breath steady but uneven. "That changes things," he said quietly. "I know," I whispered. "And I don't regret it." We sat in the studio after that, not speaking, just sharing space. He brought out one of Gianna's old sketchbooks and let me flip through it, page by page. The drawings were loose, emotional, bursting with color even in pencil form. "She painted how she felt," Alessio said. "Not how things looked." "I used to do that too," I said. "You still can." His voice carried no pressure, just possibility. And I wondered if that's what he was offering, not just security or affection, but permission. Permission to be whole again. Eventually, I stood, unsure what to say. Alessio didn't stop me, didn't ask for more. He just walked me downstairs and pressed a lingering kiss to my temple at the door. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "I was always going to," I answered. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of fear or guilt, but because my heart wouldn't stop beating like it had something urgent to say. I kept remembering the way his voice cracked when he talked about Leo. The way his hand hovered before it rested on my back, like he was afraid I might break. And how, for the first time in a very long time, I didn't want to run. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual, even though my body was still humming with nerves. Teresa smiled knowingly, though she said nothing. Leo was waiting by the gate again, waving so hard his whole body bounced. "Come see what I drew," he shouted, tugging me by the hand. And suddenly everything felt right. The picture was a castle, like always, but this time, 3 stick figures stood in front of it. One was clearly Leo, his name written in all caps. The second said Eva. The third had darker hair and a small heart scribbled above his head. "That's Papa," Leo said proudly. "We all live there now." I didn't know what to say, so I just knelt beside him and kissed the top of his head. Alessio stood in the doorway, watching quietly, one hand resting on the frame. When our eyes met, something unspoken passed between us, acknowledgement, maybe, or agreement. Not love. Not yet. But something real enough to make the ground feel steadier beneath our feet. Later, as I cleaned up our lesson materials, Alessio came to stand beside me again. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "Good," he replied. "Because I don't want to undo what we've started." "I don't want that either." And I meant it. I left without warning, without ceremony, just a quiet conversation with Teresa and a note left on the table. "Thank you for everything. But I can't stay." It was the only truth I could manage, and even that felt brittle in my hands. I didn't text Alessio. I didn't say goodbye to Leo. The ride home felt longer than it should have, even with no traffic. The streets of Milan passed by in silence, blurring like the inside of my chest. I told myself I was doing the right thing, putting space between myself and a world that could so easily consume me. I repeated the words like a mantra. "You don't belong there. You're not built for that life." But when I unlocked my apartment and stepped inside, it felt smaller than before, emptier, like something had been removed. I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, coat still on, shoes still tied. I waited for relief. It never came. Only guilt. I kept seeing Leo's face, the way his arms wrapped around me at bedtime, the way his eyes lit up when I arrived. I thought about Alessio's hands, how careful they were, how still. And his voice, when he said I brought light into a house filled with shadows. I'd felt needed, wanted. But that want came wrapped in too much danger. The bird in the velvet box had been the first real crack. The silence behind it had been worse. What kind of life could I live, constantly looking over my shoulder? Constantly wondering which smile was sincere and which hallway held a trap? I was too ordinary for this, too soft, too untrained in the language of power and fear. So I stayed away. For 2 days. I didn't go to the estate. I didn't answer Marco's texts or the calls from unknown numbers. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the ache to fade. Then, on the 3rd night, someone knocked on my door. I froze, every nerve in my body going sharp. I crept toward the peephole, heart already pounding. And when I looked through the glass, the world stopped moving. Leo was standing there, small, serious, in his little coat, with 2 of Alessio's security men flanking him like bodyguards. I opened the door slowly, unsure if I was dreaming. "Leo?" I whispered. His face crumpled the second he saw me. "You promised you wouldn't leave." His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. I dropped to my knees. "I'm so sorry," I said, gathering him into my arms before I even realized I was crying too. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't say goodbye," he mumbled against my neck. I waited all day. My throat closed around his words like they were shards of glass. Marco stepped forward, clearing his throat gently. "He insisted," he said. "We tried to talk him out of it. He told Alessio he needed to see you." "He let him come?" I asked, stunned. "He drove him here himself. He's downstairs." I looked at Leo, still clinging to me like I was something irreplaceable. Then I stood, wiping my face with the back of my sleeve. "Can I come down with you?" Marco nodded once. "He's waiting in the car." I didn't even grab my coat. The SUV was parked just outside, engine idling, headlights cutting soft beams into the night. Alessio sat in the back, one arm resting along the seat, face unreadable in the shadows. When the door opened and he saw me, he didn't speak. He just looked at me like he didn't trust himself to say the wrong thing first. I slid into the seat beside him. Leo stayed outside with Marco, giving us space we hadn't asked for but clearly needed. The silence stretched for a full minute before I broke it. "I'm sorry." He shook his head once. "You don't have to be." "Yes, I do," I said. "Because I left without giving you a chance to make me feel safe again." He closed his eyes, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "I would never keep you in a world you didn't choose," he said. "But I also can't pretend this world doesn't come with shadows." I nodded slowly. "That's why I left. I wasn't running from you. I was running from what loving you might cost me." His eyes opened again, sharp and focused, but no longer cold. "I won't chain you, Eva," he said softly. "But I won't let anyone hurt you." That's the difference. I believed him. Not because he said it like a promise, but because he said it like a vow. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the city breathe around us. Then I said the thing I'd been afraid to name. "I don't know where I belong in this." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But I know it's not without you." That truth didn't fix everything, but it carved space for something to grow. I didn't say I was coming back. I didn't ask for terms. I just reached out and took his hand, and the way he exhaled, like he hadn't been able to breathe since I left, was answer enough. When we got out of the car, Leo ran to me instantly, wrapping both arms around my waist like he was afraid I might disappear again. "Are you staying now?" he asked, hopeful but hesitant. I looked at Alessio, then back down at Leo. "Yes," I said, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I'm staying." Later that night, Alessio walked me to the guest room, my room now, apparently, and paused just before I stepped inside. "You're not owned, Eva," he said quietly. "You never were." "I know," I whispered, "but sometimes, it's hard to tell the difference between being wanted and being claimed." His reply was soft. "Then I'll spend as long as it takes proving that difference to you." I slept in the estate that night, but not like before. I didn't feel like a visitor or an employee. I felt like something else, still undefined, still dangerous, but undeniably real. And when I woke to the sound of Leo humming from the next room, my heart didn't ache. It felt full. Have you ever walked away from something out of fear, only to realize your heart had already made the choice for you? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe to follow the moment Eva's feelings stop being something she can hide from, because what's coming next? She won't be able to ignore it. The day of the attack began beautifully, which somehow made everything worse. I'd come into the city with Alessio and Leo for a quiet lunch at a small trattoria near the Opera House, one of those cobblestone-lined places that felt tucked away from the world. Leo sat beside me, happily drawing dinosaurs on his paper place mat while Alessio discussed school options for him next year. It felt almost normal, that tiny shared silence, the three of us gathered around a table like we were something close to a family. And part of me let my guard down because I wanted, desperately, to believe we could have moments like that without consequence. We stepped onto the sidewalk afterward, sunlight catching in Leo's curls as he hopped between shadows on the pavement. Alessio placed a hand on the small of my back, guiding me gently toward the car waiting across the street. I remember hearing a pigeon's wings flap hard overhead, the distant hum of traffic, a woman laughing nearby. And then the world split open. A sharp crack echoed down the street, one sound, then two more. Everything happened at once. Marco slammed into me from the side, knocking me to the ground so hard my breath left my body in a painful rush. Leo screamed, "Hi," terrified, and Alessio's shout cut through the chaos like a blade. Men in black surged around us, forming a wall of bodies, of muscle, of movement. Another shot rang out, striking metal somewhere near the car. Someone grabbed my arm, dragging me behind a parked van, shielding me with their body as the street erupted in shouts. My palms scraped hard against the pavement, my knees burning as I tried to find Leo in the chaos. All I could hear was the pounding of boots and the clipped Italian orders being thrown across the sidewalk. The world became noise and dust, and the dizzying spin of fear. I tasted blood, coppery and metallic, from biting my tongue. Then suddenly, silence. The kind that feels wrong, too fast, too planned. Someone hauled me to my feet, and through the panic, through the pounding in my ears, I saw Alessio standing just yards away, chest heaving, face carved into fury. Leo clung to him, crying, arms wrapped tightly around his father's neck. Alessio's eyes snapped to mine, wild with something that wasn't anger, but fear. He crossed the distance between us in 3 strides, hands gripping my shoulders before I could breathe. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, too forceful to be gentle and too gentle to be forceful. I shook my head, though my legs still trembled. "You could have been killed," he said, voice low, dangerous. "You both could have." I'd never seen him look like that, blood on his sleeve, fury radiating from every inch of him, terror flickering beneath it. "It was for you," I whispered, realizing it as I spoke. "The attack was meant for you." He didn't deny it. Instead, he pulled me into his chest with a force that knocked the breath from my lungs. And in his arms, trembling against him, I realized just how small my world had become and how completely it was now tied to his. The police came, flashing lights and clipped questions, but the Costa men handled everything before I could find my voice again. They moved with precision, with purpose, with the kind of experience that comes from surviving far too many close calls. Alessio barely spoke except to give orders, to check on Leo, to steady me when my knees threatened to give out. When he finally led us to the car, his hand never left mine. I didn't even try to pull away. Back at the estate, the quiet was suffocating. I went to wash my scraped palms in the downstairs bathroom, staring at the small cuts, at the faint tremble that still lingered in my fingers. My face in the mirror didn't look like mine, too pale, too shaken, too aware. I pressed both hands to the counter to steady myself. The attack had been fast, chaotic, terrifying, but the aftermath wrapped around me like a truth I could no longer ignore. When I stepped back into the hallway, Alessio was waiting. His jacket was off, shirt sleeves rolled, knuckles bruised again. "You're not going home tonight," he said, not as a command but as a certainty. "I won't risk you being alone." I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Because he was right. He walked me up the stairs, slower than usual, like he wasn't sure whether I might collapse halfway. At the top of the landing, he stopped, turning to face me, his expression softer now, almost fragile. "I can't protect you from everything," he said quietly. "But I will die before I let anything take you from me." The words were not dramatic. They were truth. I didn't respond, not because I doubted him, but because the weight of what he was saying pressed into me too deeply. Instead, I followed him down the hall to the guest room that had slowly become my room over the past weeks. He opened the door for me, but I didn't step inside. Something held me in place, fear, maybe, or connection, or the knowledge that crossing this threshold now meant something permanent. "I don't know what this is supposed to be," I whispered. "I don't know where I fit, or if I fit at all." He took one step closer, eyes steady, voice soft. "You fit with Leo," he said. "And you fit with me." My breath hitched. "And if I stay?" His answer was quiet, but absolute. "Then you stay under my protection at all costs." I didn't decide with logic. I didn't make a list of pros and cons. I simply moved, toward him, not away, and that was enough. His hand brushed my cheek, barely a touch, but it broke something inside me. Something that had been trying to resist this gravity for far too long. That night, my things were brought from my apartment without me even asking. Not because Alessio commanded it, but because I didn't say no when Marco offered. I stood in the middle of my new room, the one overlooking the gardens, and breathed slowly until the shaking stopped. I wasn't a guest anymore. I wasn't temporary. I was someone who had to be protected, someone worth protecting, someone they would not allow to be taken. And for the first time, I didn't fight the truth. I let it settle into me like a promise I wasn't ready to name, but no longer willing to deny. 6 months later, the estate no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a rhythm, coffee in the garden, Leo's laughter echoing down the halls, the rustle of security shifting silently in the background. My days moved between lessons and library afternoons, between carefully painted canvases and dinners where Alessio and I sometimes talked for hours without touching, and sometimes barely spoke at all but still said everything. I no longer kept a suitcase near the door. I had unpacked my life, drawer by drawer, into this house I once feared. The violence didn't vanish, it never would, but it receded to the edges, tamed by structure and silence and the knowledge that people now watched over me like I was something irreplaceable. There were still close calls, whispered threats in dark corners of the city, names I wasn't allowed to hear. But there was also safety in numbers, in loyalty, in the invisible net Alessio had wrapped around me and Leo both. It didn't choke. It held. Leo's Italian had improved rapidly, and with it, so had his joy. He read aloud now without prompting, painted pictures that covered his bedroom walls, and once asked if I could teach him how to order pasta in French so I can surprise Papa on vacation. He started calling me Eva less and our Eva more, always glancing at Alessio when he did, like it was a question and a statement at the same time. I never corrected him. I didn't want to. The morning of my birthday, I woke to a knock on my bedroom door. When I opened it, Leo stood there holding a folded card, clearly handmade, his small hands smudged with marker and glitter. "You have to read it now," he insisted, bouncing on his toes. I knelt down, heart already full, and unfolded it carefully. Inside, in big block letters and crooked spelling, were the words, "Thank you for giving me my papa back." The breath left my lungs. I didn't know how to respond, so I hugged him instead, too tightly, probably, but he didn't complain. "You're the best birthday gift," I whispered. "You and your glitter attack." He giggled. Papa helped fold the paper, but I picked the words all by myself. I believed him. Completely. Later that evening, after dinner and laughter and too much wine, Alessio asked if I'd join him in the studio. The old one. Gianna's. Mine, now. We hadn't been up there together in months. The light was low when we entered, golden from the wall sconces, reflecting softly off canvases lined up against the far wall. My paintings lived here now, half-finished portraits, quiet abstracts, water-stained sketches of Leo's laugh and Alessio's silhouette in shadow. I stepped into the center of the room without speaking, letting the stillness settle around us like a memory. Alessio stood behind me, close but not touching, the way he always gave me time to come to him first. When I finally turned, he held something in his hand. A small, silver key resting on a thin chain of leather, simple, unremarkable, beautiful in its humility. "What is this?" I asked softly. He placed it in my palm. "To the studio," he said. "To your space. To whatever you want it to be." I stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at him. Not a ring, I said quietly. Not a lock. He shook his head. Just a key, he replied. No promises you haven't already made in your own way. And then he said, softer still, not everything I have was taken by force. Some of it, I was lucky enough to be given. The words broke something in me. Not in a painful way, but in the kind of way that allowed light to pour into places I hadn't realized were still closed. I stepped forward and kissed him, slow, intentional, not because it was owed or expected, but because it was mine to give. He didn't pull me closer, not right away. He waited. When he did reach for me, it wasn't possessive. It was reverent. Like he was afraid to hold on too tightly to something he still didn't believe he deserved. But I leaned into him, and he finally exhaled, like the last of his breath had been waiting for that moment. And in that quiet, I made my choice again. Not because I was safe. Not because the danger had passed. But because I chose this. I chose them. I chose us. Later that night, I found the key resting on my nightstand, the silver catching the moonlight through the open window. I held it in my hand as I fell asleep. And for the first time in years, I didn't dream of escape, I dreamed of staying. Of roots. Of peace earned, not given. Thank you for listening until the very end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the story. There's another story like the one you just enjoyed on your left screen.